tells the dusty path, what the bee hums to the alluring nectar, what rainfall croons to the lowering eaves. Poetry connects humanity with nature. Poetry is no oracle's kennel for a soul philosopher's stone. Poetry is no oracle's kennel for the soul's philosopher's stone. The words of the oracle are usually subject to interpretation, and they must be interpreted by people who are schooled in the art of the oracle, in the language of the oracle. And this is not the kind of poetry that Niyi Osundare advocates. And so that's why it says poetry is no oracle's kernel, but a soul philosopher's stone. Poetry should not be difficult. And then finally it says poetry is man meaning to man. So we'll simply take the poem again. Poetry is not the esoteric whisper of an excluding tongue, not a claptrap for a wandering audience, not a learned quiz entombed in Greco-Roman law. Poetry is a live spring which gathers timber. The more throat it plucks, her binge of reaction, the more minds it stays. So there you have that poetry moves the individual. Poetry stays the individual to action. Because the socially committed poetry of Niyi Osundare means that the masses should be informed and empowered through information to take the right action in any social situation. Poetry is the hawker's ditty, the language of the ordinary person in the streets. So you have the language of the ordinary person in the streets. The eloquence of the gong, the lyric of the marketplace, the luminous ray on the grass morning dew. Poetry is what the soft wing music to the dancing leaf, what the soul tells the dusty path, what the bee hums to the luring nectar, what rainfall croons to the lowering eaves. Poetry is no oracle's kennel, but a soul philosopher's stone. Finally, poetry is man meaning to man. Okay, so what I'll do next is to read the definition of poetry, from Songs of Our Time, written by yours sincerely. Okay? So the title is, what is poetry? What is poetry? What is poetry when the words fry like akara in the inferno of criticism? What is poetry if the content defeats the form in the contest for relevance? What is poetry if meaning flies in the face of pompous jargons? What is poetry when the theme of justice is shrouded in myths and mystery? What is poetry if the poet is plagued by the poverty of words? Poetry is time recorded in quotes. It is the laughter of nature. Poetry is the tears of man dried on the pages of the Melina tree. It is the wit that withstands the swords of the ages. Poetry refines the defined moment of man into the gasoline of pleasure, instruction, and inspiration. Poetry is ideas clothed in colorful wit. Poetry is the whip of sarcasm that lashes the foolish back to wisdom. Poetry is the dove that hovers over the battlefield. Poetry is love stewed in innocence. Poetry is the power that transforms. Poetry is the power that transforms without ulterior agenda. Poetry is what only a poet can sing. The mind is the poet, not the man. The mind of the poet must be mad. The madness of a poet must be mathematical. The math itself must be simple, since the quadratic of words destroys enthusiasm. Poetry is music sung with words and danced to by the pure in heart. So that is the full point. So what are we saying here? Poetry is what is poetry when the words fry like a carrot in the inferno of criticism? Meaning that poetry is not about condemnation. It's not all about condemnation. What is poetry if the content defeats the form in the context for relevance? Meaning that the fact that you want to send across a message does not mean that you should forget the beauty of language in your poetry. What is poetry if meaning flies in the face of pompous jargon? So there I'm aligning with Osundare that poetry should have simple language. So what is poetry if meaning flies in the face of pompous jargon? I mean, use high Latin words that people don't understand. That should not necessarily be called poetry. What is poetry when the theme of justice is shrouded in myths and mystery? You're talking about how to deliver the people, but the people themselves don't even understand what you're writing. What is poetry if the poet is blessed by the poverty of words? That means even though you want to write simple poetry, you still need to be creative. You need to use the right words, the right diction, because poetry thrives on proper diction, proper deployment of diction. So poets must use the right words in the right places in order to create the necessary effect, even though they have to tone down the language. That's what I'm saying. Poetry is time recorded in quotes. Poetry is time recorded in quotes. That means poetry captures what is going on in our society at the moment of its writing, but in such a way that it is creative and imaginative and subject to interpretation. Because you're not writing history, you're writing poetry, so you have to go about it. Even though you're writing about what is happening in society, you need to do it in a creative way, an imaginative way, so that what you're writing will be subject to what? Interpretation. That's why it is coded. It is in quotes. If things are done in quotes, then that means for them to be understood, they have to be interpreted. They have to be decoded. So poetry is time recorded in quotes. It captures our temporality, but in such a way that we have to decode them. It is the laughter of nature. The laughter of nature there implies sarcasm, satire, which is among the important tropes in this collection. Because part of what we do is to laugh at human weaknesses, which is the hallmark of satire. And then people can say their mistakes and change their ways. So it is the laughter of nature. So we read poetry and have fun, laugh at our mistakes and correct ourselves and move on. Poetry is satiric. Poetry is a satire. It's a laughter about man's weaknesses. Poetry is the tears of man dried on the pages of millennial tree. Poetry interrogates our collective misery and woes as human beings. It is the wit that withstands the source of the ages. That means poetry is timeless and universal. The poem that is written today will continue to be relevant many years to come. Poetry refines the defined moments of man into the gasoline of pleasure. Whatever happens in our collective history, poetry rearranges it, puts it in a different way, in such a way that when we read, we enjoy what we are reading. So poetry has a function to it. Poetry is witty, poetry is creative and imaginative. Poetry is creative and imaginative. Ideas clothed in colorful way. That gives it a sense of personality. So whatever you do in poetry, you must be creative and imaginative. Whatever ideas you want to put across, you must do it in a witty manner, clever manner. Poetry is the whip of sarcasm. That is the kind of poetry that is found in this collection as well. Songs of Our Time by Etim. Sarcasm is a kind of remark that hurts. Okay? A kind of remark that hurts, a spiteful remark that hurts. It's meant to mock. Okay? The victim. Poetry is the whip of sarcasm. So the poem itself is packed with metaphors. Because when you say poetry is the whip of sarcasm, poetry is a whip. That means it's a tool for correction, for discipline and correction. So it lashes the foolish back to wisdom. Okay, that person that does not want to hear words. So you use poetry as a whip. Then when you hit the back, all right, in traditional disciplinary methods, the person will now understand what is happening. The brain will be reset, all right? The person will now start behaving well. Okay, so poetry can be likened to the whip that disciplines people through sarcasm, a hurtful remark. So it's not all the time that poetry has to be enjoyed. Sometimes it makes you, hurts you, just to change you. Which is the dove that hovers over the battlefield. Poetry is many things, including that which brings peace. Dove is a symbol of peace whenever there is war. And you have a dove. That means D-O-V-E, dove, right? That's what we normally call it dove, but it is dove, right? D-O-V-E, dove, that hovers over the battlefield. So poetry is that which that makes peace, that brings about peace, okay, among humanity. Then you have poetry is love, stewed in innocence. Poetry is the power that transforms without ulterior agenda. Poetry has its own power. Remember I said that poetry is a powerful tool that can change society. Poetry is what only a poet can sing. So poetry is a song. There, poetry, you see that poetry is a song. All right? Poetry poems are sung. But they can only be sung by the poet who has what it takes to sing. So poetry is the only song that can be sung by poets. Okay? And remember that poets use words in creating reality, or recreating reality. That's why poets are co-creators with God. Right? Good. And that's why I said whenever you see poets that you need to bow. Right? Okay? But I don't know whether you people have been doing that whenever you see poets. Okay? Good. So, the mind is the poet, not the man. The mind is the poet. That is the part of the poet that you have to worship. It's not the personality. Because Salman Rushdie says something very striking. He says, to meet a writer is often to be disappointed. To meet a writer is usually to be disappointed. All right? Because when you meet writers through their books, they look like very tall, towering figures. But sometimes when they appear, they are nothing like what you expected in appearance, right? But what really makes writers great is the mind. It's the mind that produces that work that is so great that everybody reads and is happy. Okay? Apart from that, poets just look like any other ordinary human being. So it's the mind of the poet that you are supposed to worship. So the mind is the poet. The mind is what makes the poet, not the man, the physical person that you see. Okay, so if you are going to bow for the poet, it has to be that you're bowing today. That's that powerful, extraordinary mind that the poet has. Okay? And if you want to become a poet too, you have to sharpen your mind. That is what has to change in you. The mind is powerful. The mind is what makes one person to be different from the other. And how do you sharpen your mind? Through education, through perception, through contemplation, through meditation, through reading, scholarship. You have to engage your mind in profitable ventures, like reading, which is the best form of exercise to the mind. And that's how you're going to change your personality from the other person sitting beside you. If you read more than the other person, then you guys are not the same. Even though you walk on the same earth, right? They are not the same. All right? Good. So the mind is the poet and not the man. The mind of the poet must be mad. Okay? That means his mind has to be extraordinarily different from others. The mind of the poet is completely different from others, to the point of being radically different from others. They have the same mind. The madness of a poet must be mathematical. This is what we call order in chaos. It's a calculated madness. Not ordinary madness that you have see people on the street, but this one is calculated. Okay? Madness. So the madness of a poet must be mathematical. It's calculated. It's carefully measured. It's disciplined madness. Okay? It knows what it is doing. Exactly what it's doing. It is strategic. It's not irrational. Then the math itself must be simple. Poetry has to be simple. I subscribe to that notion that poetry must be what? Simple. It must be simple for the ordinary people to understand. Okay? Ordinary people like you to understand. Since the quadratic of words destroys enthusiasm, when you use too difficult words in your poem, people will not understand it, people will not like it, people will be bored. Right? So that's the reason why poetry should be simple, because not everybody who understands high-fidelity language. Poetry is music sung with words. If you want to write poetry, you must make your words be rhythmic and beautiful, pleasing to the ears. Because that's the only raw materials that poets have, words, and danced to by the pure in heart. It's only the pure in heart that will appreciate poetry. So if you love poetry, you are pure in heart. Everybody say, I am pure in heart. Okay, so that is, you have to take note of those two definitions of poetry, including other ones that you might come across and might want to add to your repertoire of meaning of poetry in poetry itself, and others that were taught. So we now move on to types of poetry. We'll begin with the epic. Remember that we are live on YouTube at the moment, and all our classes are recorded on YouTube and are available if you go to my YouTube channel, Eyoh Etim. Just search Eyoh Etim on YouTube. My name will come up and you can visit my channel. But once you get there, remember to subscribe. Right? Good. Thank you very much. So let us begin with the epic. Epic. The epic is the oldest form of poetry. The epic is the oldest form of poetry, or this type of poetry. If you want to follow the notes, it's good for you to write down the notes, but if you want to follow the notes, You can Google Unseen Prose by Eyoh, Unseen Poetry, sorry, by Eyoh, and then you can join us with the notes. But it's good to write if you want to. So the epic is one of the oldest forms of poetry because it goes back to the classical period. The epic is one of the oldest forms of poetry because it goes back to the classical period. It goes back to the classical period. It goes back to the classical period. The epic can be defined as a long narrative poem. The epic can be defined as a long narrative poem that is written in an elevated style. The epic can be defined as a long narrative poem written in an elevated style using flowery language and which praises heroic deeds. The epic is a long narrative poem. The epic is a long narrative poem written in an elevated style, making use of flowery language and used to praise heroic deeds. Used to praise heroic deeds. The epic is a long narrative poem written in an elevated style, using flowery language and used to praise heroic deeds. Used to praise heroic deeds. Used to praise heroic deeds. The epic can be defined as a long narrative poem written in an elevated style using flowery language and used to praise heroic deeds. Heroic deeds. Heroic. Okay? So the first quality of the epic is that it is long. The first quality of the epic is that it is what? It is long. The epic is the lengthiest poem, the lengthiest type of poetry. The epic is the lengthiest type of poetry. The epic is the lengthiest type of poetry. As I said in the other class, we hardly write the epic anymore. You know, the conventional poetry is one that you can read in a minute or two. You are done. But the epic, it will take you days to read the epic because it's organized in books and there can be up to 12 books. All right? So the epic is organized in books and cantos. The epic is organized in books and cantos. Books and cantos. And can be up to 12 books, with each book containing not less than 5 cantos and so on and so forth. So the epic can run to thousands of lines, from 1,000 lines to 2,000 lines and so on and so forth. So that's how lengthy the epic is. That's to give you an idea. That should give you an idea of how lengthy the epic is. Can run into more than 1,000 lines, or 1,000 lines up. So it is long. Another thing you need to notice that the original epic was not written down. The oldest epics that we had were not written down. They existed in oral form. They were composed orally. They were composed by the bards. The writers of the epic were called bards. They were called bards. Okay? Poets. Sometimes you come across the word bards, you know that refers to poets, right? They're epic writers. So they were composed by the bards and then stored in their memory and recited when necessary, when needed, in formal occasions, during formal occasions. So that tells us the strength of the human memory. That's to tell us about the strength of the human memory. How powerful the human mind is. People of old were able to compose epic. They didn't write it down, they memorized it and were able to recite it during formal occasions. So you must never underrate the power of the human mind. So the epic is long. Another word in the definition that we must talk about is narrative. Narrative. This means that the epic tells a story. This means that the epic tells a story. The epic tells a story. Narrative. When a work of art is described as narrative, it means that it tells a story. Whenever a work of art is described as narrative, simply means that it does what? It tells a story. Narrative poem tells a story. Okay? Always remember that. So when you are reading the epic, you are reading a story. That's why we call it a narrative poem. It tells a story. And what story does it tell? It tells stories of the actions of great men in order to praise them. Actions of great men, heroes, in order to praise them. The epic is written in an elevated style. It's another thing that we need to talk about. That tells us about the language of the epic. Because you cannot talk about style without talking about language. So the epic is written in an elevated style. Meaning the epic has grand style. The style of the epic is what? Grand. The epic has grand style. The language is elevated, not the language of common people. Because the style has to, because we are talking about great men and great women and their actions, you cannot use ordinary language to discuss them. You need to use formal language. You need to use solemn tone. You need to use official language to discuss it. And the language has to be elevated, not the language of common people. So that is the style of the epic. It is grand, deserving of kings and queens, deserving of heroes. So the language of the epic is refined. The language of the epic is refined, not the language of common people. Language of the elite, language of the highly educated. It's a highly specialized language. That's the language of, because you're talking about important people. That means you need to raise your game, linguistic-wise or language-wise. So that's why the tone of the epic is solemn and formal. deserving of great men. So the epic makes use of grand style. Whenever you hear of grand style, know that that's the style of the epic, the elevated style. Or you can say high style, that the epic makes use of high style. High style. So the epic praises heroic deeds. That means the epic is a form of praise poem. It extols the heroic actions of its heroes with principal characters. Most of these actions were exploits in the battlefield. Most of these actions were exploits in the battlefield. Exploits in the battlefield. In fact, we are told that some kings usually had bars with them, gripes with them, at the battlefield, so that they will witness the actions of these great heroes. So that after the battle, they will now be able to write down the poems, write them down in poems, in poetry, to be recited during occasions to honor the kings and the queens and the people, the heroes, the knights, who sometimes die and give their lives to in the service of the people. And how are they going to be remembered? Through these poems, which immortalize them. Because we can use poetry to immortalize people. Whatever is in literature lives on across the ages. And so if you want to live on across the ages, either you are a poet or you become a friend of a poet. Right? That's how you live on across the ages. Either you become a poet or you become a friend of a poet. Because by existing in poetry, your memory is never going to be forgotten. So let's just talk about the structure of the epic. How's the epic structured? The epic usually begins with an invocation of the muse. The epic usually begins with an invocation of the muse. Invocation of the muse. This means that the epic is an inspired art. This means that the epic is an inspired art. You could not write the epic on your own. You needed a larger than life force to inhabit you, to give you the power and the inspiration to write the poem. That's why before the epic writer begins to write, he or she must do what? Invoke the muse. Okay? It is like when the pastor wants to start preaching, the pastor will pray that the Holy Spirit should lead him, so that let it not be him speaking, but the Holy Spirit speaking through him. Amen, somebody. Amen. So in this case, the spirit that guides the poet is the muse. All right? The spirit that guides the poet is who? The muse. The life force, the spiritual force that guides the poet is the muse. In some cases, the poet can also be called muse. But in this case, we must see muse as the supernatural force that enables the poet to write. So most times in your study of poetry, you come across the word muse, M-U-S-E. You must understand that that is the inspiration to the poet, the invisible force that inspires the poet to write. So if you write poets, you need the muse. It is that force that prompts you and say, write this, and will disturb you until you have written it. Because the muse will not only tell you to write, it will not leave you until you have written it down. Right? Good. So that's why you see that poets are all spiritual beings. Okay? So the reason why you must become a poet, because you become spiritually conscious, right? So the muse is the goddess of poetry, or the source of inspiration for poets. And it is that which the epic writer invokes at the beginning of the acts of writing. The invocation of the muse is the first thing that you come across in the epic. Because you see, the poet cannot do it alone. He needs a larger than life force, a force greater than himself, in order to write, compose that poem. Long or lengthy as it is, cannot write it alone. Okay? So even today, when people write, we'll now go and ask them, what gave you inspiration? What was your inspiration? All right? What was the inspiration for writing this work? All right? What was the motivating factor? Now the inspiration might not be spiritual anymore, it might be other things. Okay? So, but you must have an inspiration to write before you can write. Because it is that inspiration that keeps you going in difficult moments. Because it's not always easy to write. But if you have the right inspiration, you'll finish it. The plot structure of the epic is in medias res. The plot structure of the epic is in medias res. The plot structure of the epic is in medias res. It is Latin. It is Latin for in the middle of things. It is Latin for in the middle of things. Medias res is Latin for in the middle of things. Meaning that the epic begins in the middle. The events in the epic begin in the middle. The events in the epic begin in the middle, in medias res. And then it can work its way back to the beginning and then goes to the end. Okay, so if we have event A, we have event A, B, C, the epic begins here. This is where the epic begins, in middle of things. Then it can work its way here and then comes to the end. In the middle of things. Another thing that you need to note about the epic is that it involves the intervention of the supernatural in human affairs. The epic involves the intervention of the supernatural in human affairs. The world of the epic is organized in such a way that the gods and goddesses are always involved in human situations. So there's one of the characteristics of the epic is that the supernatural intervenes in human situations, whether it is in war or in other circumstances. The epic is really about war. So in winning, whether you win or lose the war, the gods are involved, right? The gods are involved. Maybe that's why people usually say grace, right? That there's grace. All because of grace. And these gods, each individual tends to have a god that he worships. And these gods act on their behalf to help them. That's what you find in the world of the epic. So a good example of the epic is the Iliad. A good example of the epic is the Iliad. By Homer. Iliad by Homer. Homer wrote two epics, one was sequel to the other, and one was prequel to the other. So you have the Iliad, then you have the Odyssey. So, for instance, the Iliad is about the Trojan War. The Iliad is about the Trojan War. It interrogates the story of the Trojan War, and the Odyssey completes the story by focusing on Odysseus, one of the heroes of the Trojan War. Let's look at the mock epic. The mock epic. Or mock epic. So Homer, for instance, is a classical epic composer, but we have epic composers in the Renaissance, like Edmund Spenser in The Faerie Queene and John Milton in Paradise Lost. You need to note that. But the mock epic was not written until the 18th century in English literature. Just note it down. The mock epic was not written until the 18th century in English literature. The mock epic was not written until the 18th century in English literature. So you see, the mock epic has all the characteristics of the epic. The mock epic has all the characteristics of the epic, except that it has a light subject matter. So that it has a light subject matter. It treats a trivial subject matter. It treats a trivial, unserious subject matter. That's why it's mock epic. It has all the qualities of the epic. What makes it mock epic, and what makes it different from the real epic is that it treats a trivial subject matter, it treats an unserious subject matter, resulting in laughter, or mockery, or satire. Resulting in satire. So while the epic is serious, the mock epic is what? Not serious. It's light. It causes us to laugh. The tone of the epic is solemn. The tone of the mock epic is satiric. So if you don't call it mock epic, you can call it mock heroic epic. Mock heroic epic. Mock heroic epic. Because of his style. Because of his style. And that is because it is written in heroic couplet. It is written in what? Heroic couplet. It is written in heroic couplet. It's written in heroic couplet. And what is heroic couplet? Please note this. What is heroic couplet? Heroic couplet has 2 lines. Heroic couplet has 2 lines. 2 lines. Heroic couplet is a 2-line stanza poem. 2-line stanza. Heroic couplet has 2 lines. These 2 lines must rhyme. These 2 lines must what? Must rhyme. Must have a rhyme scheme. Must rhyme. And must be written in iambic pentameter. Must be written in iambic pentameter. Must be written in iambic pentameter. So a heroic couplet is a 2-line stanza with a rhyme scheme made up of iambic pentameter, meaning it must have 10 syllables. It must have 10 syllables. Each line must have 10 syllables. Each line must have 10 syllables. In case you're asked to define a heroic couplet, what is a heroic couplet? It's a 2-line stanza poem with a rhyme scheme and written in iambic pentameter. Iambic pentameter, this is what iambic pentameter means. Iambic pentameter means that the stress distribution, iambic means that the stress distribution is unstressed syllable followed by a stressed syllable. The line of the poem must be organized in such a way that you have one unstressed syllable followed by a stressed syllable. That's iambic. Then pentameter means that this unstressed and stressed syllable must occur 5 times in the line. pentameter means 5 times. I am means one unstressed syllable followed by a stressed syllable. Then pentameter means it must occur 5 times. So iambic pentameter. Okay? When you want to scan that poem, you notice that you have an unstressed syllable followed by a stressed syllable. And this set must occur 5 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That makes it pentameter. So iambic pentameter. A good example of a mock epic is The Rape of the Lock by Alexander Pope. A good example of a mock epic is The Rape of the Lock by Alexander Pope. So the poem talks about rape, but it is not the conventional rape, it is rather the rape of someone's lock of hair, which creates a funny situation because you make so much out of something so unserious, okay, as cutting off someone's lock of hair. You make so much out of it. So the poem, The Rape of the Lock by Alexander Pope, is an example of a mock epic, a mock heroic epic. It is long, like the normal epic, is narrative, but the subject matter it treats is trivial, resulting in laughter, all right, and satire. Let's look at elegy. Elegy. Elegy is written without an R. So it's elegy. This is one. Elegy is written without an R. So you can hold your ear and say, elegy has no R. Elegy has no R. Elegy has no R. Okay? So an elegy is a poem that mourns a loss. Elegy is a poem that mourns a loss. An elegy is a poem that mourns a loss. A loss can be a person. It's like the right loss. Loss. A loss can be a person, can be something that's treasurable, right? It can equally be a contemplation of the times in terms of things that are no more. Okay? You can write an elegy about the fact that 1 naira is not equal to $1 anymore. Okay? I mean, we have lost that economic advantage that we used to have in this country when you could exchange 1 naira and have 5 pounds. 1 naira can give you 5 pounds. It's normal. So you can write an elegy for that, the loss of that economic advantage. Okay? Or you can remember the time when fuel used to be 100 naira per liter. You can write an elegy on that. Okay? You can say 1 naira per liter fuel, please come back. Where have you gone to? Why can't we see you again? Okay? Why have you left us? 1 naira per liter of fuel. Why did you die? Okay? That would be beautiful poetry, right? Good. So, it's not only when someone dies that you write an elegy. You can write elegy about such things that I've said. Okay, you can mourn for 1 naira or 100 naira per liter of fuel that is no more. Okay? So you could say that he died in the year 2000, 20 years ago, and that you are remembering it today. Okay? And that his brother is tormenting us. His brother is 1,000 naira per liter. He's tormenting us. Okay? Good. So, we also have the dirge. We also have the dirge. The dirge. Dirge. It's spelled D-I-R-G-E. Dirge. Another type of poem is dirge. So the dirge is like the elegy, but there's a slight difference between the dirge and the elegy. The dirge is like the elegy, a poem of mourning. Like the elegy, the dirge is a poem of mourning for loss, but there is a slight difference between the dirge and the elegy. The difference is in the spontaneity of the dirge compared to the elegy. The difference is in the spontaneity of the dirge compared to the elegy, meaning that the dirge is more spontaneous, okay, and usually is a sudden reaction to pain or loss. The dirge is a spontaneous reaction to loss or pain. The elegy writer has more time to think, and his poem is more celebratory compared to the dirge. He has more time to organize his thoughts. But for the dirge, it occurs at the moment of knowing or learning about the loss. The dirge occurs at the moment of learning about the loss. Spontaneous reaction to pain or loss. That's the dirge. The dirge is a spontaneous reaction to what? To pain or loss. So immediately something tragic happens. That reaction that escapes from you is dirge. It's dirge-like. Right? You've just heard that someone has passed away. That reaction that comes at the moment of learning about the laws is dirge. So the dirge is a poetic lament. It's a poetic lament about the loss of a loved one, about a tragic situation, poetic lament. Lament. By loss or the demise of someone. So, the elegy usually goes beyond the immediate object of laws to talking about other issues in society in a mood of criticism. In a mood of criticism. In a mood of criticism. So the elegy will not only talk about that demise, it will mourn the demise, it will restore the virtues of the person that has gone, but it will also make sense about even the politics and the social circumstances of the time through the agency of that loss. So for the dirge, we've said it's not limited to human beings. It can also be, we can also mourn for values that are no more around. You can look around, it's like in the 70s, we used to have this kind of values. Like children used to greet their elders, but now they don't greet their elders anymore. So you can decide to write an elegy or a dirge for that. Okay? Okay? The children of nowadays, they don't greet elders anymore. But in our time, right, when we were growing up in the Civil War, before the Civil War, right, there was respect for elders. Okay? But immediately after the Civil War, people do not have respect for elders anymore. And it continues still today. Right? All right, threnody. Let's look at threnody. It must be spelled the way it is written on the board. Threnody. Threnody. Right? Good. So the threnody is a short poem that mourns the dead. The threnody is a short poem that mourns the dead. So sometimes you may not say dirge, sometimes you may not say elegy, but you may say threnody. And then you don't need to be confused at that point. Like, what is this threnody? Okay? What is this threnody? It's a short poem that mourns the dead. So most times in literature, the only problem you have is if you have not encountered the term before, because it might be something that you know, but in another, rendered in another way. So that could be a problem. So the threnody is a poem that mourns a loss. So when the American African American actor Boseman passed away, I remember I wrote a threnody for him. entitled Trenody for Bozeman. A Trenody for Bozeman is online. If you Google a Trenody for Bozeman, you will definitely see the poem. You know him? Wakanda Forever. You know Wakanda Forever. So let's read the poem. Somewhere in Africa, a baby announces its arrival into the world with a joyful cry. What figure of speech is joyful cry? What figure of speech is joyful cry? Macaroni. Macaroni. Okay. All right, listen. A Trenody for Bozeman. Somewhere in Africa, a baby announces its arrival into the world with a joyful cry. In Lebanon, another baby sings its exit cry as it flees an explosive world. In America, Bozeman takes a bow after his final existential performance. The world was at a standstill when it breathed its last. The sun lost its glory and shone darkness on the earth. The rains that beat us were stones of oppression, which pursued us into the safety of our enemy's shelter. The world was at a standstill when it breathed its last. Out of ignorance, we mocked his bravery, while he fought an epic battle to defend us with his last breath. The world was laughing when he breathed his last. A hero has gone home to Wakanda. Even death could not stop him, could not kill him. Bozeman's life towers in our collective memories, filling empty spaces once occupied by doubt, teaching lessons on the self-confidence of a race and the glory of black pride, flooding our despairing cries with distant hopes about a time when the past will be at peace with the present. Son of Wakanda, when you cross the point of the cross, greet the ancestors and ask them to remember us here in a dialectical world. And do not fail to send your spirit to inspire us, hero of Wakanda. When the drums of welcome begin to beat in Wakanda, dance like a star, for you earned that name when you once walked this sphere. Like a star, you will shine long after the world has gone dark. Rest on, Chadwick Boseman. We love you now and always. Okay, so that's it. That's the poem for Boseman. So Trenody, that's his shot. So how many of you have watched Black Panther? Wow. So do you remember Boseman now? Okay. Let's just move on and talk about an ode. Let's talk about the ode. It's a type of poetry. The ode. It's not ode, it's ode. Oh, an ode. Right? right? So don't say Ode, because you're not from Ijabode. Right? So the oath is a press point. The oath is a press point. Press point. The oath is a press point. The oath is a press point. It is used to eulogize. It is used to eulogize human beings and things. The oath is a press poem. It is used to eulogize human beings or things. That means it is used to praise human beings or things. This is how you write eulogize. Eulogize. To praise. So one thing that you need to note about the oath is that it does not discriminate its object of praise. You can write that down. The oath does not discriminate its object of praise. The oath does not discriminate its object of praise. It does not select that which it praises. That's what I'm talking about. The oath does not select that which it praises, does not discriminate what it praises. Unlike the epic, which praises heroic deeds. If you are a common person, the epic cannot praise you because you are low down there, right? But the oath can praise anybody, anything. Can praise anybody, anything. That's what we are talking about. That's an important characteristic of the oath. It does not discriminate its object of praise. It does not select its object of praise. You can even write an ode to my pen. If you like the pen so much, you can write an ode about it. You can say an ode to my hair. If your hair is beautiful, you can write poetry about it. Okay? So it does not select. You can write an ode to your glasses, right? Right. Can make you see the future, right? I said my glasses help me to see the future. I know what will happen 20 years from now, thanks to my glasses. Okay? You can write an ode to your school bag, or to your handbag, an ode to my handbag, right? Okay? Good. So it does not select its object of praise. There are three major types of oaths. There are three major types of oaths. We have the Pindaric oath. Pindaric oath. We have the Pindaric oath. We have the Pindaric oath. If you don't call it Pindaric oath, you can call it regular oath. Regular oath. Regular oath. Like regular verb. You ever heard of regular verbs? So like regular verb, you have Pindaric oath or regular oath. Then you have irregular oath. Irregular oath. We have the regular ode. And then we have Horatian ode. Horatian ode. Horatian ode. You have the Horatian ode. So let's just talk about Pindaric ode. Let's talk about the Pindaric ode. It is named after its Greek originator by name Pindar. It's named after its Greek originator by name Pindar. Its Greek originator by name Pindar. The Pindaric ode is named after its Greek originator by name Pindar. Pindar's odes were modeled after the songs sung by the chorus in Greek drama. Pindar's odes were modeled on the songs sung by the chorus in Greek drama. Modeled on the songs sung by the chorus in Greek drama. Sung by the chorus in Greek drama. They were organized in 3 sets or stanzas. The odes were organized in 3 sets or stanzas. The odes were organized in 3 sets or stanzas. The odes were organized in 3 sets or stanzas, known as one strophe. Known as one strophe. Strophe. Antistrophe and echo. Antistrophe and echo. The strophe is sung when the dance rhythm moves right. The strophe is sung when the dance rhythm moves right. The strophe is sung when the dance rhythm moves right. The antistrophe is sung when the dance rhythm moves left. And the epode is sung when the dance rhythm, when the chorus stands still. The epode is sung when the chorus stands still. When the dance rhythm stands still, when the chorus stands still. There is Pindaric ode in English literature. Remember that in the Renaissance, the English people modeled their literature after the Greeks and the Romans. So that's why you can have ode in classical period and then ode in English literature, epic in classical literature, epic in English literature in the Renaissance time, so on and so forth. So, the English Pindaric or regular ode is modified. It's modified so that all the strophes and the antistrophes are written in one stanza. So that all the strophes and antistrophes are written in one stanza pattern. The English Pindaric ode or regular ode is modified so that all the strophes and antistrophes are arranged in one stanza pattern, while all the poets are written in another stanza. While all the poets are written in another stanza. While all the poets are written in another stanza. A good example of an ode is Ode to the West Wind. Ode to the West Wind by Percy Bysshe Shelley. Ode to the West Wind by Percy Bysshe Shelley. Ode to the West Wind by Percy Bysshe Shelley. Percy Bysshe Shelley. Ode to the West Wind. So you could see that this ode is about the wind, the west wind. That's why I told you that the ode can praise anything. Ode to the West Wind by Percy Bysshe Shelley. So we can read to see how it vibes, right? Let's read the poem to see how it vibes. To feel it vibes. O wild west wind, thou breath of autumn's being, thou from whose unseen presence the leaves dead are driven, like ghosts from an enchanter fleeing, yellow and black and pale and hectic red, pestilence-stricken multitudes, O thou who charioteest to the dark wintry bed, the winged seas, where they lie cold and low, each like a corpse within its grave, until thine assured sister of the spring shall blow. A clarion, o'er the dreaming earth and field, driving sweet buds like flocks to feed in air, with living hues and odors plain and hue. Wild spirits, which art moving everywhere, destroyer and preserver, hear, oh, hear. Thou on whose stream meet the steep sky's commotion, loose clouds like earth's decaying leaves are shed, shook from the tangled boughs of heaven and ocean. Angels of rain and lightning that are spread on the blue surface of thine airy surge, like the bright hair uplifted from the head of some fierce monarch, even from the dim verge of the horizon to the zenith height, the locks of the approaching storm, thou dirge of the dying year, to which this closing night will be the dome of a vast sepulchre, vaulted with all thy congregated might, of vapors from whose solid atmosphere black rain and fire and hell will burst. Oh, hear. Thou who didst waken from his summer dreams the blue Mediterranean, where he lay lulled by the coil of his crystalline streams, beside the pumice isle in Bias Bay, and saw in sleep all palaces and towers quivering within the waves in tents a day. All overgrown with azure moss and flowers so sweet, the sun fence picturing them. Thou, for whose path the Atlantic's level paths cleave themselves into chasms, while far below the sea blooms and the rosy woods which wear the supple foliage of the ocean know. Thy voice and sudden grow gray with fear and tremble and despise themselves, O hear. If I were a dead leaf, thou mightest bear. If I were a swift cloud to fly with thee, a wave to pant beneath thy power and shed. The impulse of thy strength only less free than thou, uncontrollable. If even I were as in my boyhood, and could be the comrade of thy wanderings over heaven, and then went to outstrip thy sky speed, scarce seemed a vision, I would ne'er have striven as thus with thee in prayer in my sore need. Oh, lift me as a wave, a leaf, a cloud. I fall upon the thorns of life, I bleed. A heavy weight of ours has changed and bowed, one too long, one too like thee, timeless and swift and proud. Make me thy lyre, even as the forest is. What if my leaves are fallen like its own? The turmoil of thy mighty harmonies will take from both a deep autumnal tune. Sweet though in sadness, be thou spirit fierce, my spirit be thou me impetuous. Drive my dead thoughts over the universe like withered leaves, so quicken a new birth. And by the incantation of this verse, scatter as from an extinguished heat, ashes and sparks my words among mankind. You throw my lips to unawakened earth, the trumpet of a prophecy, O wind. If winter comes, can spring be far behind. So that is the point. And that is where we bring our class to a close for today. When we meet again, we will continue from this point. Please go on YouTube and check out the videos, and remember to subscribe. Have a blessed afternoon.